The chapel smelled of lilies and regret. Rows of mourners filled every seat, their heads bowed as the choir's slow hymn carried through the air. Cameras from national networks lined the walls, capturing every tear, every sigh, and every glance at the man who refused to grieve. Damien Ward sat in the front row, perfectly dressed in a black suit tailored to perfection. His late wife's portrait rested on an easel just a few feet away. Amira Lawson. Ward, the woman whose heart had carried him from emptiness to empire. But today, he wasn't mourning her. He was checking his watch. The pastor spoke about Amira's kindness, her service, her faith. Every word drew soft nods from those who knew her, nurses, volunteers, and families she'd helped. Yet Damien's gaze wandered. His phone vibrated twice, and instead of silencing it, he answered a text with a faint smirk. A whisper rippled through the crowd. Then it happened. Someone said something funny beside him, a small comment about how long this was taking. Damien laughed, out loud. The sound cut through the hymn like glass breaking. Heads turned. Gasps filled the air. Even the pastor stopped speaking. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Another muttered, "He's laughing. At her funeral." Cameras flashed. The moment was caught. A billionaire husband smirking while his wife's coffin sat before him. He leaned back, adjusted his cufflinks, and whispered to the woman beside him, a tall, striking figure in a black dress who wasn't his wife. "Let's get this over with," he murmured, voice cold. "I have a dinner meeting after this." Her lips curled into a faint smile. Murmurs spread. The air grew tense. Every lens turned toward him, and, as Amira's casket was lowered moments later, Damien didn't shed a tear. He simply stood, brushed invisible dust from his sleeve, and walked away, leaving whispers and disbelief in his wake. Outside, the cameras followed. The headline would write itself before sunset. He mocked his wife at her funeral, but what no one knew yet, what not even Damien understood, was that Amira had already written her final chapter, and it would change everything he thought he owned. The moment Damien stepped outside the chapel, the calm turned chaotic. Reporters surged forward, microphones in hand, their voices clashing like waves. "Mr. Ward, any words for your late wife? How do you respond to those calling your behavior disrespectful?" He didn't answer. He simply adjusted his tie, shielded his eyes with dark sunglasses, and moved toward his waiting car. The cameras clicked non-stop. His security team formed a barrier, but nothing could block the world from seeing what had already been recorded inside. From every corner of the crowd came whispers that sliced through the hum of reporters. He laughed. During her eulogy, with another woman on his arm, the woman, Nia Brooks, stayed close to him, her arm linked through his as though she had a right to be there. Her designer heels clicked against the pavement while Damien's expression stayed, detached, as if he were walking out of a corporate event, not his wife's farewell. An older nurse who had worked beside Amira shook her head in disbelief. "She gave everything to that man," she muttered, tears forming, and he couldn't even stand for 5 minutes without checking his phone. The cameras caught every reaction, the disgust, the pity, the disbelief. Within minutes, social feeds were full of images. Damien's faint smirk, Nia's presence, the widow's portrait in the background. Comments poured in, labeling him heartless, arrogant, unfeeling. But Damien didn't flinch. He slipped into his sleek black car, shut the door, and exhaled with quiet satisfaction. The engine hummed to life, and as the driver pulled away he muttered, "Glad that's over." Behind him, the funeral continued. People wept and held hands, sharing stories of Amira's warmth. But the man she had loved, the one she'd believed she could change, was already gone, his conscience silent, his heart untouched. The press would soon replay that laugh in slow motion, frame by frame, until the whole country saw how little a billionaire's heart weighed when stripped of love. The world had seen wealth, power, and ego before, but Damien Ward's laughter that day became a symbol of something deeper, the death of decency. As the footage spread, the narrator's voice cut through the noise like quiet thunder. She loved him more than life, and he repaid her with humiliation. It wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about how arrogance blinds the heart, and how love, when ignored, finds its own justice. Amira Lawson Ward wasn't a name most people knew before her passing. She was gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who helped strangers and never sought praise. She gave her time, her energy, her entire soul to a man who believed affection was a distraction. To Damien, she had been convenient, loyal when he needed calm, invisible when he wanted control. But what he never saw coming was that her quiet strength was far louder than his money ever could be. Now, her silence echoed louder than any scandal he could buy his way out of. Every headline that morning carried her name, not his, the kind-hearted nurse who married a billionaire and died forgotten, the woman who taught the ruthless CEO his final lesson. Amira's story was only beginning. While Damien dismissed her as gone, she had left something behind, something far greater than wealth, revenge, or words, a truth that would unravel his pride and expose the emptiness he'd tried to hide behind luxury. Because sometimes love's final act isn't forgiveness. It's justice wrapped in grace. Welcome to Mr. Ashford's Love Stories. If this is your first time here, thank you for joining us. And to everyone returning, you already know. Here, every story carries more than romance. It carries truth. Some stories lift us. Others warn us. But this one, it reminds us that love without respect eventually destroys itself. So before we continue, take a moment, hit the subscribe button, give this story a like, and share it with someone who still believes that good hearts don't lose, even when life seems unfair. Because what you're about to hear proves one thing: karma never rushes, but it never forgets. Damien Ward had the world, power, wealth, admiration, but he traded his soul for ego. He thought he buried the woman who once gave him peace, but the truth was, Amira had already planted her final lesson. Her kindness wasn't weakness. It was foresight. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. And soon, the man who mocked her at her own funeral would learn that some promises keep breathing, even after the person who made them is gone. What Damien didn't know that day, as he laughed beside his mistress, as cameras caught the arrogance in his smirk, was that Amira had already written his downfall with her own hand. Weeks before her passing, she had spent long nights in her hospital room with a lawyer and a notary, signing documents that would outlive him and perhaps even humble him. Her frail fingers trembled as she held the pen, but her resolve was unshakable. She didn't want revenge. She wanted truth to correct what love had failed to teach. The world saw a widow's coffin that day. But what truly lay beneath those flowers wasn't just her body. It was a silent message that would rise from her grave and shake his empire. Because karma didn't come with noise or warning. It came through her will. That single letter, written in her handwriting, would soon appear on Damien's desk like a ghost that refused to stay buried. And when he opened it, every choice, every insult, every moment of mockery would echo back at him louder than applause ever did. He had laughed at her funeral. He had celebrated her absence. But soon he would discover that she was never gone. Her love would return, not to comfort him, but to rebuild him through loss. Stay with me, because this is where the story truly begins. Amira Lawson was no stranger to hard work. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, she grew up in a 2-room apartment her aunt managed to keep after her parents' accident. Her life was modest, marked by quiet mornings and long nights filled with responsibility. While her friends spent their 20s chasing trends, Amira chased purpose. She became a nurse, not because it was glamorous, but because it mattered. Every morning she tied her hair back, put on her scrubs, and stepped into a hospital ward filled with both pain and hope. Her shifts stretched endlessly, 12 hours of steady care, holding the hands of strangers who had no one else. She didn't complain. She found meaning in easing someone's fear, in staying calm when families fell apart around her. But what defined her wasn't just her job. After work, she volunteered at a local women's shelter. There, she listened, truly listened, to stories of heartbreak, abandonment, and survival. Those women became her strength. They reminded her that kindness didn't make you weak. It made you human. Her aunt often told her, "You give too much, baby. The world doesn't always give back." Amira would only smile and reply, "That's why I give, because most people won't." Life wasn't easy. The bills came fast. The exhaustion stayed longer, but Amira carried herself with quiet grace. She found joy in small things, the laughter of her patients, the soft sound of rain on her window, and the comfort of her faith when days felt too heavy. Deep down, she dreamed of something more, not money, not fame, but partnership. Someone who saw her heart and valued it. She didn't know that wish would come true in a way that would both bless and test her soul. Her story of love began not in a fairy tale ballroom, but in the heart of her reality. The hospital where she worked, surrounded by beeping machines and lives hanging by a thread. And one evening, that's where fate decided to introduce her to Damien Ward. The hospital's annual charity gala was the biggest event of the year. It was meant to raise funds for new equipment and free treatment programs, but to the city's elite, it was an excuse to display wealth under chandeliers. Amira had attended only because her department needed representatives on duty. Her white uniform stood out among sequined gowns and designer tuxedos. She stayed near the back, quietly managing the donation tables and helping elderly guests find their seats. Her shoes weren't new, her jewelry simple, but her smile drew more attention than she realized. Across the hall stood Damien Ward, founder and CEO of Ward Technologies. At 37, he was one of the most talked-about billionaires in the country. His name carried weight. His presence commanded silence. People whispered his achievements. The young man who'd turned his father's small company into a global empire. To the world, he was confidence and precision personified. But when Amira looked at him that night, she saw something else. His face, though poised, carried an exhaustion that money couldn't erase. His handshake was firm, but his eyes seemed distant, like a man living in motion, too tired to stop. Their paths crossed when an elderly donor dropped her glass of champagne near the main table. While staff rushed in, Amira was the first to kneel, dabbing the spill before the woman could apologize. Damien had approached at the same moment to assist. Their hands met on the same napkin. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes lifting to his. He hesitated, taken aback by her tone. "You're not part of the staff team?" "I am," she replied, "but everyone deserves a clean floor, right?" A brief pause. Then, for the first time that evening, Damien smiled, small but genuine. "I suppose so." Later that night, as he gave his speech about innovation and giving back, his gaze drifted toward the corner where Amira stood, listening. She wasn't networking or trying to be noticed. She was serving water to the volunteers. That simplicity lingered with him. When the event ended, he sought her out. "You handled that chaos earlier like a professional diplomat," he said, extending a card. "If you ever organize medical programs, contact my office. I'd like to support." She hesitated before accepting. "Thank you, Mr. Ward. The hospital always needs help." He tilted his head, studying her. "And you? What do you need?" Her answer was short, honest. "Rest." That single word amused him. No flattery, no pretense, just truth. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him without expectation, and that night, as he left the gala in his black car, he looked back through the tinted glass to see her gathering leftover plates. Humble, calm, unaware she had just shifted something inside the billionaire everyone feared but no one understood. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, yet fate had already begun closing the distance between them. The call came 2 weeks later. Amira was in the break room, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, when the hospital director approached. "Mr. Ward's foundation is funding the new cardiac wing," he said. "He asked for you to coordinate the outreach program." She froze mid-sip. "Me? Why me?" "His request," the director replied with a smile. "Apparently, you made quite the impression." At first, Amira thought it was a misunderstanding. She wasn't the social type, but professionalism was something she never compromised on. When Damien arrived for the first planning session, she was prepared. Documents arranged, budget drafts ready, tone strictly business. But he wasn't there to intimidate. He listened, asked questions, and observed her with quiet curiosity. Between meetings, he'd linger to ask about her patients or the shelter she volunteered at. She found his interest unusual, but not unpleasant. He was direct yet respectful, confident yet searching for something beyond the routine of wealth. Their connection grew in fragments, shared coffee breaks after meetings, quick conversations by the hospital's courtyard. Amira discovered he had a dry sense of humour. Damien discovered she had no interest in his fame. For a man used to being admired for his power, that was new. Months passed. The project concluded successfully, but neither wanted to end their meetings. He invited her to dinner as gratitude, but conversation flowed easily. She talked about her patients. He talked about losing his father young and feeling pressure to live up to an empire. He admitted, "Sometimes I feel like everyone sees the company, not the man." Her answer was simple. Then, stop hiding behind the company. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. From then, dinners turned into late-night phone calls, and phone calls turned into walks through quiet streets when his world felt too loud. She grounded him. He softened her guarded edges. What started as two opposites became balance, until even his board noticed the change. "You smile more, Damien," one of them teased. He only replied, "Maybe I finally have a reason to." Their wedding wasn't extravagant. It was held by the ocean, his choice, her dream. No celebrity guests, no press, just family, close friends, and the sound of waves brushing the sand. Amira wore a simple white dress, barefoot, holding flowers she'd chosen herself. Damien wore a linen suit, his usual arrogance replaced by quiet admiration. When the minister asked him to repeat his vows, he said, "You remind me what it means to live for something real." She replied, "You remind me that even power needs peace." They exchanged rings under the sunset, sealing a promise neither of them fully understood, but both believed in. As they stood hand in hand, the wind carried her laughter, pure, gentle, and full of hope. For a moment, it seemed like forever had found them. But forever has its tests, and theirs was waiting quietly, ready to reveal how love behaves when success begins to speak louder than the heart. The first year of marriage was peaceful. Amira managed their home with warmth and patience, while Damien balanced his corporate empire with newfound calm. He would come home to the smell of her cooking, to laughter echoing from the living room, to conversations that stretched late into the night. She was his anchor, and he was her safe place, or so she thought. Then, as Ward Technologies expanded globally, things began to shift. Success demanded more of him, more meetings, more flights, more time away. He grew sharper, colder, buried under deadlines and deals. Their dinners turned into quiet meals interrupted by phone calls. Their weekends became business trips. At first, Amira made excuses for him. "He's under pressure," she'd say. "It'll calm down soon." But soon, never came. When she asked for time together, he would sigh. "Amira, I'm building something here. You don't understand how demanding this is." Her soft voice would respond, "I understand, Damien. I just miss you." He'd give a half smile, kiss her forehead and say, "We'll fix it after this quarter." Yet every quarter brought another excuse. He began to view her patience as predictability, her calm as complacency. When she spoke about her work at the hospital, he dismissed it as cute charity. When she mentioned her volunteering, he'd nod absent-mindedly without listening. He surrounded himself with people who praised him, who reminded him of his importance. Her silence, once soothing, began to irritate him. She no longer fit the image of the billionaire's wife his world expected. Amira felt the distance growing, but she didn't know how to bridge it. She left notes on his desk, reminders of dinners, quotes about love, even Bible verses, small attempts to bring him back home. Most went unread. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal. The candles flickered, soft music played, and she waited, wearing the blue dress he once said made her glow. Hours passed. Midnight came. Then her phone buzzed. A short message. Meeting ran late. Don't wait up. She sat there, staring at the untouched food until the candles burned out. The next morning, he walked in wearing the same suit, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, "You look tired." He replied flatly, "That's what success looks like." Those words stung more than silence. It wasn't hatred, it was neglect, a slow erosion of affection replaced by pride. He didn't shout or strike. He simply forgot to see her. And yet, she stayed, not because she was weak, but because she believed that love, once true, could be mended. But love cannot compete with ego. It only waits until the waiting becomes too heavy to carry. The warning signs arrived quietly, like changes in the weather. Small enough to dismiss, steady enough to wound. Damien's schedule became unpredictable. His assistant started calling late at night, his phone never left his hand, and his tone grew detached. He had once looked at Amira like she was the calm after every storm. Now, his eyes darted past her as if she were part of the background. He stopped attending hospital events. The same man who had once donated to her foundation now claimed he had no time for small talk. His office became his refuge, his colleagues his new family. Amira, once his peace, was now an afterthought in his empire. One afternoon, while organizing his study, she noticed a receipt tucked under a stack of documents, a dinner reservation for two at a 5-star restaurant in Atlanta. The date matched the night he'd told her he was stuck in a board meeting. She didn't cry. She didn't accuse. She simply folded the paper and placed it back exactly where she found it. When he came home, she greeted him with her usual softness. "How was the meeting?" she asked. He loosened his tie and replied without looking at her, "Long and tiring." She nodded slowly. "Did it end well?" "It always does when I'm in charge," he said, pouring himself a drink. Her lips trembled, but she smiled through it. "I'm sure it did." From that night on, something changed in her eyes. The hope dimmed, replaced by quiet understanding. She realized she couldn't compete with the version of Damien who only loved control. The next day, she stayed longer at the shelter. She spoke to women who had been hurt, betrayed, abandoned. Their strength began to inspire her in ways she hadn't expected. One of them said, "Men like that don't fall from power, they fall from grace." Amira didn't respond, but her silence said enough. At home, Damien started spending weekends abroad for meetings. His cologne smelled different, sharper, foreign. He carried a new phone he never left on the counter. His laughter returned, but not with her. She prayed for him still, whispering his name every night before sleep. But prayer cannot heal a heart that refuses to listen. Her aunt noticed the change when she visited. "You've lost weight, child. Are you all right?" Amira smiled faintly. "I'm fine. I just haven't been sleeping much." Her aunt held her hand. A woman who loves deeply must also know when to love herself. That night, Amira sat alone by the window, watching city lights flicker like distant memories. She thought about the man who once called her his peace, now restless in every direction but home. The betrayal hadn't surfaced yet, but it was close, hovering like a shadow that grows with every lie. She could feel it, though no proof had touched her hands. And deep down a quiet voice began to whisper, not of anger, but of acceptance. She didn't know it yet, but her heart was already preparing for the day it would need to let go. It was a Thursday evening when Amira finally faced the weight of her silence. She had finished another 12-hour hospital shift, her back aching, her body tired. Still, she went home and cooked dinner, hoping Damien would show up on time for once. The table was set for two, candles lit, napkins folded, music playing softly in the background. Every few minutes, she glanced at the clock. 8 turned to 9. 9 became 10. Midnight came, and the food had grown cold. When the door finally opened, Damien walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice the untouched plates or her red-tired eyes. He muttered a distracted "hey," then disappeared into his office without another word. She stood there, frozen. Her eyes fell to the ring on her finger, still shining under the dim light. It looked beautiful, but felt heavier than ever. She walked to his office door, paused, then stopped herself. The words she wanted to say, "Do you still love me? Do you even see me?" died before reaching her lips. She turned away, retreating to the balcony where the night breeze carried the faint hum of the city below. From that height, the world looked peaceful. Lights flickered in distant apartments. Laughter echoed faintly from passing cars. Somewhere out there, people were loving freely, openly. And here she was, standing in silence, loving a man who'd forgotten how to love her back. Her mind replayed their first meeting, the fundraiser, the warmth of his early smiles. She wondered how the man who once held her hand at sunset had become so unreachable. Her throat tightened. For the first time, she didn't cry. Tears, she realized, weren't strength. They were habit. Instead, she whispered softly into the wind, "Love shouldn't hurt this quietly." The words left her lips and drifted into the dark, as though she were releasing something sacred. A truth too painful to hold any longer. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked toward the horizon, where the faintest trace of dawn had begun to color the sky. It was a small reminder that light always returns, even after the longest night. That evening marked the quiet turning point of her soul, the moment she stopped waiting for apologies and began understanding her own worth. Inside, Damien laughed faintly at something on his phone, unaware that the woman he once called his peace was learning how to live without his presence. By the next morning, Amira woke early, brewed her coffee, and left a note on the counter before heading to the hospital. It was short, written neatly in blue ink. Some distances aren't created by miles, but by silence. She didn't sign her name. She didn't have to. That note, like her whisper, would one day echo in his mind long after she was gone, the sound of a love too pure for the pride that broke it. Nia Brooks entered Damien's world like a spark in a dry forest, sudden, bright, and dangerous. She was everything his fading marriage wasn't: bold, outspoken, and endlessly confident. A luxury brand consultant known for transforming public images, she had built her reputation on charm and strategy. Their first meeting happened at a corporate gala in New York. She was there to pitch a rebranding project for Ward Technologies' upcoming expansion. When Damien stepped into the room, she greeted him with a smile that didn't ask for approval. It demanded attention. "Mr. Ward," she said, extending her hand. "I've studied your company's trajectory. You've built brilliance but forgotten the human story behind it. That's where I come in." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her audacity. You're saying my company lacks personality? I'm saying it's time the world sees your ambition the way you see it. Flawless, she replied, her tone smooth and deliberate. Her words flattered his ego in ways Amira's gentle honesty never did. She spoke his language, profit, reputation, legacy. To a man who had begun to feel emotionally unseen, her attention felt like validation. Naya had a way of making every man feel like the center of her world, yet none could ever claim her. Her success relied on understanding what people craved: recognition, power, and importance, and reflecting it back to them like a mirror. Damien fell into that reflection easily. Their meetings shifted from boardrooms to private lounges, their conversations from numbers to personal dreams. She laughed at his jokes, even the unfunny ones. She called him visionary when he discussed work, brilliant when he explained his goals, and misunderstood when he mentioned Amira's quiet nature. She doesn't challenge you, Naya said once, leaning closer over dinner. You deserve someone who keeps up with you. He didn't correct her. He didn't defend his wife. Deep down, he enjoyed the feeling of being admired without restraint. Every boundary blurred after that night. What began as harmless business dinners evolved into private trips labeled as networking. Every photo he took with Naya appeared casual, professional, polished. But beneath the polished smiles, something dangerous had already taken root. The kind of temptation that feeds pride and silences guilt. To the outside world, Damien was still the perfect husband, but behind closed doors, he was slowly rewriting his vows, replacing love with self-importance. He didn't realize that Naya wasn't his partner. She was his reflection, showing him the vanity he refused to see in himself. And every glance into her eyes brought him closer to losing the one person who had ever loved him without conditions. At first, Damien told himself he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just working late, just traveling for business, just building connections. But those words, just working, just business, soon became armor for every lie he told. His moral compass began to tilt, slowly and almost imperceptibly. He started coming home long after midnight, claiming meetings had stretched late. Amira believed him at first. She always had. But truth doesn't stay hidden forever. His calls grew shorter, his messages colder. Dinners once filled with conversation turned into silent meals where his mind seemed miles away. He would check his phone under the table, the faint light from the screen reflecting. Off his wedding ring, a small reminder of vows he no longer respected. When Amira asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off with the same rehearsed tone. You worry too much. I'm fine. She'd nod, forcing a smile. You've seemed distant, that's all. Maybe I'm just tired, he'd reply, loosening his tie. But tired men don't smell of expensive perfume that isn't their wife's. He began cancelling their plans. Every missed dinner came with an excuse. The board needs me. Investors are in town. I'll make it up to you. But the making up never came. He was addicted, not to Naya's company, but to the version of himself he became around her. Admired, powerful, desired. With Naya, there were no reminders of his promises, no quiet questions about conscience. She applauded his arrogance, telling him it was confidence. She laughed at his cynicism and called it leadership. Every time she praised him, his pride grew and his guilt shrank. Meanwhile, Amira continued to believe in the man she had married. She ironed his shirts, left packed lunches on his desk, and texted him reminders to rest. He stopped responding to those messages altogether. When she stayed up late waiting for him, she glanced at her phone. S-clock, whispering the same line each night. He'll come home soon. But the hours passed, and all she got was silence, the kind that stretches until it hurts. His staff noticed the change, too. His temper became sharp, his patience short. He began demanding perfection, dismissing kindness as weakness. At one meeting, his assistant asked gently if he wanted her to call Mrs. Ward. His answer was ice cold. My personal life isn't your concern." That night, while Amira sat alone, Damien was at a rooftop bar in Manhattan, celebrating another deal, with Naya by his side. Their glasses clinked. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're unstoppable, Damien. You shouldn't feel guilty for being great." He smiled faintly, convincing himself she was right. Success had become his justification for everything. But what he failed to realize was this: every lie, every excuse, every selfish choice was erasing something far greater than guilt. It was erasing the man Amira had once loved, replacing him with a stranger who valued ego more than empathy. And once that change took root, there was no hiding it anymore, not even from himself. The truth came to Amira the same way heartbreak always does, quietly, through details most people overlook. It began with a perfume scent on Damien's shirt, one that didn't belong to her. Then came the late-night calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. She told herself not to assume the worst. She still believed love could be mended if she just held on a little longer. One evening, she stopped by his office downtown. She wanted to surprise him with dinner, something small, thoughtful. She had even brought his favorite takeout, still warm in the bag. But when she stepped through the glass doors, his assistant froze. "Mrs. Ward," the woman stammered, "he's in a meeting." Amira smiled politely. "That's all right. I'll wait." But as she turned, her eyes caught the reflection through the frosted office window. Damien sitting too close to a woman in a red dress. Laughter carried faintly through the half-open door. The woman reached across the table, touched his hand, and said something that made him grin. It was Naya. Amira didn't enter. She didn't confront them. She quietly placed the dinner bag on the reception counter and left. Outside, she stood by her car, her heart beating so fast she could barely breathe. The world around her kept moving. Taxis honked, people laughed, lights flickered, but her own world had gone still. That night, Damien came home late. He looked surprised to find her awake. "You're still up?" he asked. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply asked, in a voice so calm it scared him, "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air, cold and heavy. He froze. For a second, his face softened, guilt flickering behind his eyes. But pride caught him before honesty could. He turned away. "You're imagining things, Amira." Her voice trembled. "Then answer me." But he didn't. Instead, he took off his jacket, muttered something about exhaustion, and disappeared into the bathroom. The sound of the running shower filled the silence he left behind. Amira stood there, numb. She realized then that silence could hurt more than any word. His refusal to answer said everything she needed to know. She went to bed without turning on the light. Her pillow stayed dry, not because she was strong, but because her heart was too tired to weep. From that night on, she stopped asking questions. She stopped waiting for explanations that would never come. The trust between them had cracked, but she refused to let bitterness define her. Instead, she turned inward, searching for something worth saving. Not in him, but in herself. Damien never noticed the shift in her spirit. He assumed her quiet was submission. But her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was the sound of a woman finally accepting that love shouldn't have to beg to be seen. That unanswered question, "Do you love her?" would echo in his mind for years to come, long after she was gone. After that night, Amira changed in quiet, deliberate ways. She stopped checking the clock for Damien's return. She stopped setting 2 plates at dinner. She began rising earlier, filling her mornings with purpose instead of waiting. The hospital became her refuge, a place where she could give without being questioned, heal without pretending. Her patients noticed the change, a deeper calm in her eyes, a gentleness layered with strength. When she smiled now, it wasn't for appearance. It was to remind herself that kindness could survive heartbreak. Her evenings, once spent waiting in an empty house, were redirected. Toward the women's shelter she had helped establish years earlier. The building wasn't large, but it was filled with hope. Walls covered with photographs of women who had rebuilt their lives, classrooms for skills training, and a small daycare corner where children laughed freely. Amira threw herself into the work. She started new programs for women starting over after divorce or loss, securing small grants, organizing fundraisers, and mentoring survivors. She found peace in their resilience. Their stories mirrored her own pain, but also offered glimpses of healing. One woman, recently abandoned with 2 children, said softly, "You speak like someone who's lived through the same storm." Amira smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm still walking through mine." Her compassion didn't come from pity. It came from understanding. She knew the ache of giving love and receiving distance. She knew what it meant to smile while breaking inside. Every night she stayed late at the shelter, writing letters to potential donors, drawing up plans for expansion. The staff urged her to rest, but she always said, "Helping them helps me." At home, Damien barely noticed her absence. When he did, he interpreted it as convenience. "I'm glad you're busy," he said one morning while scanning his emails. "It keeps you from worrying about things that don't concern you." She didn't respond. Instead, she tied her hair back, picked up her car keys, and left quietly. His indifference no longer pierced the way it used to. As the months passed, she began making headlines of her own. Local papers covered her foundation's success stories, praising her dedication to community development. Ironically, the same magazines that once labelled her the quiet billionaire. Swife now called her the woman redefining generosity. When asked about her marriage during interviews, she always redirected the conversation. "This isn't about me," she'd say. "It's about giving others the chance to start again." Each accomplishment gave her a reason to keep moving forward. Yet, beneath the strength, her body began to show signs of exhaustion. She dismissed the dizziness, the fatigue, the persistent cough. "I'm just overworked," she told her colleagues. "Nothing rest can't fix." But rest was something she rarely allowed herself. What Amira didn't realize was that her heart, the one she had poured into everyone else, had begun to wear thin. And the life she was saving others from, she was slowly losing herself too. Still, she smiled through it all, because for her, healing others was the only way to keep her own spirit from collapsing completely. It started as simple fatigue. Amira assumed it was the long hours, the emotional weight of her work, and the lack of rest. At first, she ignored it. The persistent headaches, the dizziness that made her grip, the wall for balance, the sharp chest pains that flared during her night shifts. She told herself she was strong enough to push through. She always had been. One afternoon at the hospital, she fainted while reviewing patient charts. When she opened her eyes, she was in a bed, the same kind she'd spent years preparing for others. A colleague leaned over her, worried. "Amira, you need to slow down," she said. "Your body's screaming for help." Tests followed. The diagnosis came quietly, an aggressive condition that had gone unnoticed too long. Treatment was possible, but the journey would be long and painful. Amira didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply nodded, thanked the doctor, and asked, "How soon can I go back to work?" Her colleague stared in disbelief. "You need to rest." Amira's voice was soft but steady. "People still need me." When she returned home that evening, she found Damien packing for another conference. The suitcase was half open on the bed, filled with tailored suits and cufflinks. "Leaving again?" she asked, standing in the doorway. He didn't look up. "Just for a few days. There's a merger I can't miss." "You've missed a lot lately," she said gently. He sighed, irritation creeping into his tone. "Amira, don't start. I've told you how demanding this quarter is." She walked closer. "I collapsed at work today." That made him pause. For a second, he glanced at her, eyebrows furrowed. "You what?" I fainted. They're running tests." He frowned slightly, but instead of concern, she saw impatience. "You should take better care of yourself. Maybe cut back on all those volunteer hours." Her throat tightened. "It's more than fatigue, Damien. The doctor—" He checked his watch. "I'll call you from Chicago, all right? We'll talk when I get back." And just like that, the conversation ended. He zipped his bag, kissed her forehead without emotion, and left. The sound of the door closing felt final. That night, Amira sat on the couch, staring at the empty space beside her. She realized she could no longer depend on the man she had once called her home. His love had been replaced by convenience, his empathy by ambition. Over the next few weeks, her condition worsened. Treatments drained her strength. Some days she could barely get out of bed. Yet she still forced herself to visit the shelter, her smile never leaving her face. When asked how she was feeling, she'd say, "I'm fine, just tired." Her aunt begged her to slow down. "You can't pour from an empty cup, child." But Amira only smiled. "I'm not empty yet." Meanwhile, Damien was appearing in glossy magazines, business summits, red carpets, exclusive interviews, and standing beside him in every photo was Nia Brooks, her hand casually resting on his arm. The world saw a powerful man at his peak. Amira saw the man she had loved turn into a stranger she barely recognized. By the time Damien noticed her absence at home, her hospital bed had already become her second address. The woman who had once kept his world steady was quietly fading, and he hadn't even looked long enough to see it happen. Weeks passed, and Amira's condition grew worse. The nurses at the hospital treated her like one of their own, knowing her kindness had once carried the same halls. They took turns sitting by her bed, reading her patient reports, pretending it was another normal shift. But everyone knew. This time, she wasn't the one saving lives. Her once bright eyes now carried a quiet acceptance. She still smiled, still thanked the staff, still asked about the women at the shelter. But her strength was slipping, and deep down she could feel time pressing close. The day Damien finally showed up, she was too weak to speak at first. He stood by the doorway, uncertain, wearing his usual designer suit, as if visiting her were another appointment squeezed between meetings. "Amira," he said softly, almost unsure of how to begin. She turned her head toward him, her lips curling into a faint smile. "You came," he nodded. "I heard from your aunt. I didn't realize things had gotten this bad." Her voice was thin but steady. "You didn't look close enough to see." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. For the first time in years, there was silence between them that didn't come from anger. It came from regret. He reached for her hand hesitantly. Her fingers felt cold but still gentle, like she was comforting him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. She looked at him with tired eyes. "You were busy, Damien, and I was done trying to compete with your schedule." He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but no excuse felt worthy. So he sat there, holding her hand, as memories flooded back. The beach wedding, the laughter, the promises he'd broken. For the first time, his walls began to crumble. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. Amira gave a faint laugh that ended in a cough. "Forgiveness isn't earned. It's given." He looked away, his throat tightening. "Then why would you give it to me after everything I did?" "Because bitterness would weigh me down more than illness ever could," she said softly. "I loved you, Damien, even when you forgot how to love me back." Tears slipped down his face, silent, unfamiliar. He squeezed her hand tighter. "Please, don't talk like you're leaving." She smiled gently. "We all leave, some sooner than others. What matters is what we leave behind." She paused, struggling to breathe, her eyes glistening under the hospital light. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything," he said quickly. Her lips trembled, forming her final words. "Live right when I'm gone." The room fell silent. Her monitor beeped softly beside her as she closed her eyes, the faintest trace of peace settling on her face. Damien sat there long after the nurses entered, unable to move. For the first time, he understood what real loss felt like. Not the loss of status or fortune, but of something pure that could never be replaced. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the city in muted gold. The world went on, but Damien Ward's world had finally stopped. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of his reckoning. Would you forgive someone who betrayed your kindness? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one. The morning of Amira's funeral was cold and still. A soft drizzle coated the marble headstones, and black umbrellas dotted the cemetery like dark flowers. The world had gathered to honor a woman who gave endlessly and asked for nothing in return. Doctors, nurses, and women from the shelter filled the seats, their faces marked with grief and admiration. Even strangers came, people whose lives Amira had touched through her foundation. The choir sang hymns she had chosen before she passed, their voices gentle but filled with sorrow. The ceremony had already begun when the hum of an engine broke the silence. Heads turned. A sleek black car pulled up at the edge of the crowd, and from it stepped Damien Ward, 2 hours late. He wore a tailored black suit and dark sunglasses, his face expressionless. But it wasn't his lateness that drew whispers. It was the woman beside him. Nia Brooks emerged from the car in a fitted black dress, her hand confidently wrapped around his arm. There was no grief on her face, only composure. The audacity of her presence spread through the crowd like a shockwave. She brought her here? A nurse whispered to another. To Amira's funeral? The murmurs grew louder, restrained only by the pastor's trembling voice. Damien acted as if he didn't hear. He guided Nia to the front row, sat down, and nodded toward the casket like it was a formality rather than a farewell. From a distance, Amira's aunt wiped her tears with trembling hands. "Even now," she whispered, "he has no shame." Damien adjusted his cufflinks and leaned back. When the choir began to sing Amazing Grace, his gaze drifted toward the sky, unfocused, bored. Nia leaned in and whispered something that made him grin briefly before catching himself. Cameras caught it, the smile, the timing, the heartless indifference. Reporters along the fence lifted their lenses higher, their flashes discreet but persistent. Every movement, every glance, every expression was documented. When the pastor spoke about Amira's kindness, about how she built a legacy of compassion even as her body failed, many wept. But Damien only shifted his weight, impatient. His hand tightened around Nia's as if to say, "Let's get this over with." And when the final prayer ended and her casket was lowered, Damien didn't bow his head. He didn't cry. He turned to Nia, whispered something, and together they walked away, past the crowd, past the cameras, past the judgment. The rain picked up. The umbrellas turned in their direction, following his exit. In that moment, the billionaire, who once commanded admiration, walked out of his wife's funeral carrying not grief, but arrogance. He didn't know it yet, but those few steps away from Amira's grave were the first steps toward the destruction of everything he had built. The moment Damien and Nia walked out, the whispers turned into a storm. The guests stayed seated, some in stunned silence, others exchanging looks of disbelief. The pastor stood frozen behind the podium, his Bible still open. It was as if everyone was asking the same question. How could he? A photographer from the local paper, who had been hired to document the service for Amira's Foundation, lowered his camera and muttered, "That'll make the news before sunset." The flash of cameras followed Damien as he made his way toward his car. His bodyguards tried to block the view, but it was too late. Dozens of lenses had already captured the moment. The rain blurred nothing. Every frame told a story of a husband who looked untouched by grief. One image, in particular, stood out. Damien holding Nia's hand as they walked away, the casket behind them still open. That single photograph would later circulate around the world. Inside the tent, Amira's friends huddled together. "She gave him everything," said one nurse, her voice trembling. "She built that foundation in his name, and this is how he honors her." Another woman, one of the shelter's residents, whispered, "Money doesn't buy manners." Amira's aunt remained by the casket, unmoving. Her tears had stopped, replaced by something heavier, disappointment. "He loved his image more than her," she said quietly. The press stayed outside, waiting for a reaction. Some reporters shouted questions as Damien passed by. "Mr. Ward, how do you respond to rumours of your affair? Why did you bring Miss Brooks to the funeral? Do you have any statement about Mrs. Ward's legacy?" He ignored them all. One reporter, a woman from a national outlet, raised her voice sharply. "Sir, is this your idea of mourning?" Damien stopped briefly, turned to her with an unreadable expression and said, "I don't owe anyone a performance." Then he got into his car and shut the door. The windows rolled up. The flashes continued. His jaw tightened as the driver pulled away, tires splashing through shallow puddles. From the back seat, Naya touched his arm and said softly, "You did the right thing. No need to act for people who never cared about you." He said nothing, but deep down, for the first time, something in him shifted. Not guilt, not sorrow, unease, the kind that comes when a person senses the world has turned its gaze, not in admiration, but in judgment. Behind them, the service ended quietly. The guests filed out, shaking their heads. A few journalists lingered to get more photos, zooming in on the empty chair Damien had occupied. The same chair Amira's foundation director would later describe as a seat that didn't belong to love. By nightfall, the headlines began to spread. Billionaire arrives late to wife's funeral, with mistress on his arm. The photos attached needed no captions. The disgusted comments below said it all. But while the world watched and gossiped, Damien Ward poured himself a drink in his penthouse, unaware that this was only the beginning of a downfall too public to contain. The ride from the cemetery was silent at first. The rain tapped against the car windows as the city skyline blurred by. Damien stared out, expression blank, lost in his thoughts. Naya sat beside him, crossing one leg over the other, her perfume sharp and heavy in the enclosed air. After a few minutes, she said softly, "You did what you had to do. People will always talk." He didn't respond. His mind replayed flashes of the day, the songs, the stares, the murmurs. He wasn't sad, but the attention unsettled him. The headlines forming in reporters' minds were almost audible in his head. He had built an empire on image, and today his composure had cracked in front of the world. He poured himself a drink from the car's minibar, took a slow sip, and finally said, "They expect me to cry on command. I don't fake emotions." Naya tilted her head. "You don't owe anyone your tears." Her voice soothed him. He glanced at her, grateful for the validation. "You're the only one who understands what it's like to be under that kind of scrutiny." She smiled faintly. "That's why we belong on the same side of the table, Damien. People like us don't break. We adapt." The car stopped at a red light, and through the tinted glass he saw a group of pedestrians staring. One man pointed his phone toward the car. Damien scowled. "They act like I killed her myself," he muttered. Naya placed her hand on his. "You can't control how they see you. All you can do is move forward." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Move forward? My wife's buried, and the world expects me to play the grieving widower." She shrugged, unapologetic. "Then don't. You've given enough of yourself." Her words fed something inside him, that twisted mix of pride and emptiness that had ruled his decisions for years. He leaned back, downed the rest of his drink, and said the words that would soon haunt him. "I need something worth smiling about today." Naya's lips curved upward. "Then let's change the mood." He nodded. "Yes. Enough of this mourning. I'm done pretending. The driver's eyes flickered toward the rearview mirror, uneasy, but said nothing. He had worked for Damien long enough to know that his boss didn't handle discomfort well. He drowned it in indulgence. By the time they reached the penthouse, the rain had stopped. Damien stepped out, adjusted his suit, and looked up at the night sky. "Amira wouldn't want me miserable," he said flatly, as if convincing himself. Naya smiled faintly. "Of course not." As they entered the building, the doorman's greeting was hesitant, his eyes flicking briefly toward Naya. Damien noticed and gave a tight smile. "Don't judge me," he said coldly. "I've buried my wife. That's enough grieving for one day." The elevator doors closed behind them, sealing away the whispers from the lobby. Inside, he loosened his tie and exhaled, the arrogance returning to his face. "Let's have some real company tonight," he said. And with that single remark, Damien Ward, once the husband of the kindest woman anyone had known, turned his grief into spectacle. He didn't realize yet that those careless words had already been overheard by one of the staff and would soon travel farther than he ever imagined. Because karma doesn't need witnesses. It only needs truth. By evening, Damien's penthouse looked nothing like a place of mourning. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, and laughter replaced silence. The long dining table, once set for quiet dinners with Amira, now overflowed with champagne, bottles, catered dishes, and guests dressed in black only for formality's sake. Executives from Ward Technologies, influencers, and Naya's high society friends filled the room. Music pulsed low in the background, expensive and tasteless. The mood was loud, indulgent, everything Amira had never been. Damien moved through the crowd with a glass in hand, his tie undone, his composure perfect. When one of his colleagues clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You're holding up well, man," he gave a faint smirk. "Life goes on," he said simply. The words carried across the room, drawing uncomfortable glances. Someone laughed nervously to fill the silence. Naya, radiant and composed, stood by the bar pouring drinks. Her tone was cheerful, effortless, as if the night were any other celebration. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Damien joined her, clinking his drink against hers. "To freedom," he replied. A few people hesitated before following his lead, their toasts slower, uncertain. But the moment passed when the music grew louder, and soon laughter returned. Every sound in that penthouse, every joke, every careless cheer, echoed against the memory of the woman whose body had only been buried that morning. Her framed photo still sat on the hallway table, untouched. The faint candle Amira's aunt had lit before leaving still flickered. Nearby, its small flame the only trace of sincerity left in the home. Near midnight, a junior executive discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording. He caught Damien laughing beside Naya, glass in hand, a careless arm around her shoulder. "You don't seem too heartbroken," the man joked. Damien chuckled. "I'm not the one in the ground." Gasps followed. A few guests exchanged alarmed glances, but no one dared to confront him. Some stayed silent out of fear of offending the billionaire, others out of disbelief at his cruelty. The camera kept rolling. The laughter, the champagne, toasts, the clinking glasses, all preserved in crystal clarity. By the time the guests left, the penthouse was littered with empty bottles and half-eaten desserts. Damien stood at the window overlooking the city, tipsy but satisfied. "They'll talk," he said to Naya, who was slipping off her heels. "But it doesn't matter. People forget fast." Naya smiled faintly. "Not what when the world loves a scandal," he smirked. "Then let them talk." She approached him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're untouchable, Damien." He looked out into the skyline one last time and whispered, "Exactly." But as he said it, he didn't notice the faint notification sound from his phone lying on the table. A message that read, You might want to check the news. Someone recorded tonight. By sunrise, Damien's empire began to crumble, not from market shifts, but from the weight of his own arrogance. The video from the penthouse had gone viral overnight. A 30-second clip, grainy but clear enough to capture every damning detail. Damien laughing, champagne in hand, Naya beside him. His words, cold and unforgettable, echoing through the audio, "I'm not the one in the ground." Within hours, every major outlet had picked it up. Heartless billionaire celebrates wife's funeral with mistress. Ward Technologies CEO toasts freedom after wife's death. The footage trended across every platform. Hashtags multiplied. Thousands of comments poured in, some angry, some stunned, all condemning. His social media pages were flooded with rage. Charities withdrew partnerships with his foundation. Influencers posted videos calling him soulless. By mid-morning, his assistant called frantically, "Sir, you need to address this. It's everywhere." Damien sat at his desk, staring at the screen, his face on every news site. The video looping endlessly. His reputation, once spotless, now a public punching bag. "Turn it off," he muttered. But there was no turning it off. The internet doesn't forget. Naya tried to reassure him. It'll pass. Scandals always do. But she underestimated the damage. Ward Technologies was a publicly traded company, and the market responded faster than morality. Investors panicked. Shares dropped 12% in the first hour, 20% by noon. Analysts discussed ethical leadership concerns. Advertisers pulled out of brand collaborations. By evening, the company board called for an emergency meeting. The room was tense. A dozen executives, silent and grim. Damien walked in, defiant, still in control. Or so he believed. One of the senior directors cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, the situation has escalated beyond damage control. The board is concerned about the company's image." Damien folded his arms. "Our product hasn't changed. Neither has our success. The market will recover." The director slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed headlines, social media screenshots, and a list of companies terminating contracts. "Your behavior reflects on us," he said. "Our reputation is our product." Another board member spoke sharply. "Do you understand that your face is now the symbol of everything people hate about the rich? We've received threats to boycott our products. Investors are withdrawing millions." Damien's jaw clenched. "So, you'll turn your backs on the man who built this empire?" The chairman leaned forward, voice low but firm. "We're not turning our backs, Damien. We're trying to save what's left." Silence followed. When the meeting ended, Damien was left standing alone in the conference room. The empire he once ruled had started to slip from his grasp. Not because of a hostile takeover, but because of karma finally demanding payment. Outside, reporters crowded the building entrance. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "Mr. Ward, any comment about the video? Do you regret celebrating your wife's funeral?" He pushed through the crowd without answering, his face tight, his confidence cracked. Back in the car, Naya called his name softly, but he didn't respond. For the first time, she saw something new in his eyes. Fear. Not of losing money, but of losing control. And in that silence, Damien Ward finally began to realize that when a man disrespects grace eventually withdraws and leaves him to face himself. By the next morning, Damien's world had completely changed. Ward Technologies, once the pride of Wall Street, was now the subject of ridicule. Reporters camped outside the company headquarters. Television anchors replayed his video on loop, while analysts discussed moral collapse in leadership. The fallout was immediate and merciless. 3 of his top investors withdrew funding. 2 major contracts with European partners were cancelled within hours. The company's stock, already down 20%, plummeted another 15% by the next trading day. His public relations team resigned without notice. His email inbox flooded with messages labeled termination, contract withdrawal, immediate dissolution. He tried to call the board members, but most ignored him. The few who answered spoke curtly, their tone stripped of loyalty. "You've turned us into a scandal, Damien. We can't protect you from this one," the chairman said before hanging up. By afternoon, financial news networks were broadcasting live from outside his penthouse. The camera lenses that once celebrated his achievements now zoomed in on his downfall. The captions beneath his photo read, "Billionaire CEO faces global backlash. Investors flee Ward Technologies amid funeral scandal." Even his personal accounts were flooded with hate. Thousands of messages. "Monster, disgrace. You deserve to lose everything." For the first time, the man who once thrived on attention wished to disappear. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere had changed. The music, the parties, the laughter, all gone. Naya stood by the window scrolling through her phone, her face tight. "They're tagging me too," she said quietly. "This isn't good for my brand." Damien looked up sharply. "Your brand?" She avoided his eyes. "You know how this business works. I can't be seen with someone the world hates." "So you're leaving," he said flatly. She sighed. "You'll bounce back. You always do. But I can't stay in this mess." She picked up her purse and walked out without another word. The door shut behind her, the sound echoing through the vast, empty space. For a long while, Damien didn't move. He stared at the half-finished glass of whiskey on the counter, his reflection warped in its surface. The silence around him was heavy, the kind that reminded him of everything he'd lost. He turned on his phone again, scrolling through the headlines. Every article, every video, every comment was a mirror, showing him who he had become. The billionaire who mocked his wife's memory. The man who turned grief into spectacle. His notifications buzzed endlessly, one from a journalist requesting an interview, another from a shareholder demanding his resignation. Each vibration felt like a nail in the coffin of the man he used to be. The city outside still glowed, but for Damien, the lights had dimmed. He walked to the window, staring down at the streets below, the same city he once ruled, now watching his fall with satisfaction. The phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. "You've been removed from the board, effective immediately." For the first time in years, Damien Ward had no meetings, no appointments, no one calling his name. He stood there alone, surrounded by luxury that suddenly meant nothing. The empire he had built on ambition had collapsed under the weight of his own pride, and the world, once at his feet, now looked down on him with pity and disgust. He dropped the phone onto the table, its screen still glowing with hate headlines. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and Damien whispered to no one, "I had everything, and I lost it all." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of consequence. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Damien's penthouse was quieter than it had ever been. Reporters had moved on to other stories, but the damage lingered. His phone was filled with unanswered messages. His company had moved on without him. Naya was gone. The only sound that remained was the ticking of the antique clock Amira once loved, a steady reminder of time he couldn't rewind. That morning, the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Ward," his housekeeper said, "a man from Lawson and Pierce Attorneys is here to see you. He says it's about your late wife." Damien frowned. "Tell him I'm not seeing anyone." The man's voice came faintly through the background. "It concerns Mrs. Ward's final wishes. She requested that this be delivered in person." Reluctantly, Damien agreed. Moments later, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged lawyer with silver hair and a calm presence. He carried a sealed envelope and a small voice recorder. "Mr. Ward," the man began respectfully, "I handled your wife's estate. Before her passing, she recorded a final message and left specific instructions for its delivery." Damien's expression hardened. She didn't have much to leave. The lawyer raised his eyes briefly. I think you'll find that isn't true. He handed him the envelope and placed the recorder on the coffee table. She asked that you listen to this first. Damien hesitated, then pressed play. Amira's voice filled the room, soft, tired but steady. If you're hearing this, Damien, I'm gone. I don't want your pity and I don't want your tears. I only want you to understand that love, when dishonored, still has a duty to heal what's been broken. Her words carried warmth, but also quiet strength. You once told me I made you feel seen. I wish you had kept seeing the parts of me that weren't convenient. I built something in my last year, something you never asked about because you stopped asking about me. But that's all right. What I built will outlive both of us. Damien's jaw tightened as the recording continued. I don't hate you, Damien. I only hope you find the version of yourself you lost, chasing the world's approval, the one who smiled without needing applause. If this letter makes you angry, that's fine. Anger still means you're capable of feeling. Her voice grew fainter, softer. When the world took everything from me, I found purpose in giving. I hope you do too, even if you must learn it the hard way. The recording clicked off. The room fell silent. Damien sat motionless, the letter still unopened in his hand. His throat felt tight, but he forced himself to stay composed. What is this? He muttered. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Your wife left instructions for the distribution of her estate and business shares. You should read it. Damien tore the envelope open, his hands trembling slightly. The paper inside was written in her handwriting. Neat, calm, precise. As his eyes moved across the words, his expression changed from disbelief to shock. The letter began with the same grace that defined her in life. What I built was never for power, Damien. It was for peace. And now, even in death, I want it to serve others the way love was meant to. He looked up at the lawyer, his voice low and strained. What did she do? The man exhaled slowly. She left you a gift, Mr. Ward, but not the kind you expected. The lawyer opened his briefcase and placed several folders on the coffee table. Mrs. Ward was more involved in your company than you might have realized, he began calmly. Damien leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Involved? How? She wasn't part of Ward Technologies. The man slid a document toward him. Actually, she was. 2 years ago, she invested heavily in the company through the hospital's charitable network and through her foundation. Your financial team approved the transactions, though it seems you never reviewed them personally. Over time, her holdings increased through shared assets. At the time of her passing, she owned 48% of Ward Technologies. Damien blinked, stunned. That's impossible. The lawyer met his gaze evenly. All documented, Mr. Ward. Your wife was an intelligent woman. She didn't speak often, but she acted carefully. Damien picked up the folder, flipping through pages of contracts bearing Amira's signature. Her initials beside every legal line, her handwriting looping in calm strokes. He read the numbers twice, still unable to process them. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. Before her passing, Mrs. Ward transferred her entire shareholding into a charitable trust registered under the name the Amira Lawson Foundation. Its purpose is to support women starting over after loss, abuse, or divorce. He paused, allowing the words to settle. The foundation will now own nearly half of your company. You retain the other 52%. Damien's expression hardened. She gave it away? Half my company? The lawyer didn't flinch. Half her company. Mr. Ward. The silence in the room grew thick. Damien stood abruptly and began pacing. Do you realize what this means? The board will use this against me. They'll say I've lost control. The lawyer gathered his papers calmly. Perhaps control is not the lesson she wanted you to learn. Damien stopped, glaring. She humiliated me publicly, even in death. The lawyer shook his head. No, Mr. Ward. She honored what she stood for. Generosity. The Foundation's mission reflects her character. In her final months, she met with donors, legal advisors, and social workers. She built something lasting while you were away. That last word hung in the air, sharp but restrained. Damien's jaw tightened. So, this foundation, what does it mean for me? The lawyer adjusted his tie and pulled out one last envelope, smaller than the first. It means she left you a choice. But before we discuss it, there's a clause you need to hear. Damien froze, suspicion crossing his face. A clause? The man nodded. Yes. It determines whether you remain the CEO of Ward Technologies or lose the position entirely. He slid the sealed document across the table. She wrote it herself. Would you like me to read it aloud, or will you? Damien hesitated, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. He could still hear her voice from the recording, calm, kind, unshakable. Love, when dishonored, still has a duty to heal. He sat back down slowly. Read it, he said quietly. The lawyer broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the crisp sound echoing through the silent room. And as he began to read, Damien finally realized that Amira's forgiveness hadn't been weakness. It had been wisdom, and she was about to teach him one final lesson he couldn't ignore. The lawyer unfolded the second letter with deliberate care. The sound of the paper crackling filled the room, and Damien's chest tightened. The man cleared his throat softly and began to read in a measured voice. To my husband, Damien Ward. If this letter reaches you, I trust that the truth has already been made clear. I do not wish for revenge. I wish for reflection. You built an empire on innovation, yet forgot that real innovation begins with humanity. I leave you a choice: to continue leading Ward Technologies or to step aside with grace. The decision is yours, but it comes with one condition. The lawyer paused, glancing up briefly. Damien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For you to remain CEO, you must complete 1 full year of unpaid service within the Amira Lawson Foundation. You will work directly with the people it serves, the same kind of women whose struggles you once dismissed. This is not punishment, it is perspective. Damien's face went pale. She expects me to volunteer? He muttered. The lawyer continued, ignoring the interruption. Should you refuse, or should the Foundation report misconduct, the board will have the authority to remove you permanently. These terms are legally binding, approved, and signed by all necessary parties. I trust that you will not use your influence to avoid this, for doing so would only prove that wealth has taught you nothing. Damien rose from the couch abruptly, pacing the room. This is absurd. She's controlling me from the grave. The lawyer set the paper down calmly. No, Mr. Ward, she's holding you accountable. There's a difference. Damien turned sharply. She expects me to scrub walls and attend charity meetings with volunteers. That's not leadership. That's humiliation. The lawyer met his glare steadily. Humility, Mr. Ward, not humiliation. There's a lesson in that. Damien clenched his fists. And if I refuse, the lawyer replied without hesitation, then you lose your position. The board already has the legal authority to remove you. Mrs. Ward made sure of that. You may keep your remaining shares, but you will no longer have control. He fell silent. The words stung more than any insult. For a man who had built his life around power, being stripped of it was worse than ruin. The lawyer handed him the final page. She added one last note. Damien took it reluctantly and read under his breath. I don't want to take your success, Damien. I want you to earn it again. This time, through kindness. Maybe when you stand among those who have nothing, you'll finally understand what it means to have everything. His hands trembled slightly as he set the letter down. He stared at the floor, silent. The lawyer gathered his documents. You have 30 days to decide. I'll return with the board to formalize your choice. As the man turned to leave, Damien called after him, his voice low. She really thought I needed this. The lawyer paused at the door. She didn't think, Mr. Ward. She knew. When the door closed, Damien was left alone again, surrounded by the luxury that suddenly felt like a cage. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman he'd ignored in life had managed to command his future in death. For the first time in years, he didn't reach for his phone, his drink, or his pride. He simply sat there, staring at the letter, and whispered under his breath, "She planned this all along." But beneath the bitterness, something unfamiliar stirred, not anger, not shame, but the faint ache of conscience finally waking up. The following week, Ward Technologies convened one of the most anticipated board meetings in its history. Every major shareholder, investor, and executive was present. The air inside the conference room was sharp, every glance toward Damien carrying a mix of judgment and curiosity. Reporters waited outside the glass walls, cameras ready. The story had spread. The clause from Amira's will was now public. When Damien walked in, murmurs rippled through the room. His once commanding stride seemed slower. His suit was pressed, but his confidence had cracks. The chairman began the session without preamble. "Mr. Ward," he said, his voice steady but firm, "you've read the terms outlined in your late wife's will?" Damien nodded curtly. "I have." "Then you're aware that your continuation as CEO depends on your compliance with those terms." Damien leaned forward. "I think this entire arrangement undermines the company's credibility. We can't allow personal emotions to dictate corporate policy." The chairman adjusted his glasses. "This isn't emotion, Damien. It's reputation. The public sees this as an opportunity for you to redeem yourself, to demonstrate accountability. Your refusal would send a message that you're above moral responsibility." One of the younger directors interjected, "The foundation clause has gone viral. Every major outlet is calling it the redemption condition. People are responding positively, not for us, but for her. The board's image is recovering because of her, not you." Damien's jaw tightened. "So, you're saying my wife's conditions are saving the company?" "Exactly," the chairman said. "For once, the headlines are on our side." A senior investor cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, respectfully, we've all profited from your leadership, but the public no longer trusts you. Serving under the foundation is your best chance to earn that trust back, not just for yourself, but for this corporation." The statement hit him harder than he expected. He had been used to men agreeing with him, not instructing him. But now, even those who had once envied him were speaking with authority. He looked around the table, seeing no allies. The silence was heavy. Finally, he exhaled. "If that's what it takes to move forward, I'll do it." The chairman nodded, almost relieved. "Very well. We'll release a statement." Within hours, the company's official announcement appeared across every media outlet. CEO Damien Ward commits to 1 year of community service in honor of late wife's will. Ward Technologies supports redemption initiative. For the first time since the scandal, the headlines were no longer dripping with anger. The tone had shifted. Cautious optimism replacing condemnation. Comment sections filled with mixed reactions. Some praised Amira. Even in death, she's teaching him what love means. Others doubted him. He's doing it for appearances, not change. But the world watched. Within days, his image began to change. Charities reached out in support of the foundation. News anchors debated whether his compliance signaled true remorse or calculated survival. The public didn't know the answer, and maybe he didn't either. As he left the office that day, cameras flashed again, but this time there were no insults shouted, only curious stares. For the first time, Damien didn't rush past them. He paused at the entrance, looked straight at the cameras, and said, "I'm keeping my promise." The clip spread everywhere. Some called it scripted, others saw sincerity. But either way, the message stuck. Back inside, the chairman watched the live broadcast and whispered to himself, "She changed the world one more time." And somewhere, In the quiet peace of memory, Amira's legacy began to bloom, not through pity, but through purpose. The night after the board's announcement, Damien returned to his penthouse expecting relief. Instead, the space felt colder than ever. The city lights outside glimmered like distant reminders of a life he no longer controlled. His reflection in the glass looked different, smaller, older, and uncertain. He poured himself a drink, but didn't take a sip. The silence was thick, unsettling. Then his phone buzzed. It was Naya. For a brief moment, he thought she might offer comfort, but when he answered, her voice was distant, careful. "Damien, I saw the news." He leaned back. "Then you know I'm doing what I have to." She sighed. "That's exactly why I'm calling. This whole charity thing, it's not good for my image. My brand partners are already asking questions. They think I'm tied to your mess." His voice hardened. "Your mess? You were right beside me when it started." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "I didn't make the video go viral. I didn't tell you to." He cut her off. "You didn't stop me either." Silence filled the line for a long moment. Then her tone softened, practiced, and polished. "Damien, you're rebuilding your reputation, and I respect that. But I need to focus on mine. I think we should take some space, publicly and privately." His hand tightened around the glass. "Space? After everything? Don't make this harder," she said quietly. "You'll be fine. You're Damien Ward." He laughed bitterly. "Not anymore." There was no goodbye, just the faint sound of her breathing, then the click of disconnection. He stood there for a while, phone still in his hand, before setting it down beside the untouched drink. The silence returned, louder than before. Over the next few days, the distance grew. Naya unfollowed him on social media. Her PR team released a brief statement. "Miss Brooks has ended her association with Mr. Ward to focus on independent projects." The headlines were merciless. "The mistress moves on. Ward's fall leaves everyone running for cover." By the end of the week, even his so-called friends stopped calling. His calendar, once filled with business meetings, gala invitations, and luxury dinners, was now empty. The phone that once never stopped buzzing now rang only with notifications he didn't want to read. His home, once filled with laughter, music, and motion, now echoed with nothing but footsteps. He wandered through rooms that looked like exhibits of a man who no longer existed. In the kitchen, he noticed Amira's favourite mug still sitting on the top shelf. She used to drink tea before sunrise, saying it helped her start gentle. He picked it up, turning it slowly in his hands. A faint chip along the rim caught his thumb. He whispered to himself, "You outlived all of us, Amira. Even in death, you're louder than I ever was." That night, Damien sat in the dark. No television, no music, just quiet. For the first time, he realized how heavy silence could be when no one cared enough to fill it. He thought about calling Naya again, but didn't. There was nothing left to say. The people who once applauded his success now watched his punishment. In the background, the city kept moving, unaware of the man sitting in a glass tower, learning that loneliness feels sharper when it's earned. It was past midnight when Damien finally walked into the room he hadn't entered since Amira's death. Her study. The faint scent of lavender still lingered in the air, mixed with old paper and memory. The shelves were neatly arranged, just as she'd left them. Her books, her journals, the small potted plant she attended to daily, now dried and withered. He ran his fingers across her desk, tracing the outline of her handwriting on a sticky note that read, "Be kind." Even when it's hardest, the words pierced him. For a moment, he almost turned away, but something held him there. Guilt, nostalgia, or perhaps the weight of everything she'd become in death that he hadn't appreciated in life. He opened the drawer and found a wooden box. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, folded carefully, tied together with a thin white ribbon. Each envelope had his name written in her graceful handwriting. His hand trembled as he untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated years ago, back when they were still in love. "You said I made you feel human again. I hope that never changes." He read another. "I miss the version of you that smiled before money began talking louder than your heart." And another. "I still believe in us, even when it feels like you don't." The more he read, the heavier his chest became. Her love had been patient, her forgiveness unending, until it couldn't be any more. He sat back, the letters spread out before him, his eyes red but dry. He had cried once in that hospital room, but this was different. This wasn't mourning her death, this was mourning himself. The man she once saw, the man he'd killed with pride. Slowly, he gathered the letters into a pile. His hand hesitated for a long moment before striking a match. The flame flickered to life, small and fragile. He dropped it onto the paper. The fire spread quickly, curling the edges, consuming her words one by one. The room filled with a faint, bitter scent of smoke and memory. He watched until all that remained were ashes, black flecks against the polished wood. Then he reached for the photo frame beside the box. It was a picture from their wedding day, Amira barefoot on the beach, laughing as the wind caught her veil. He was beside her, looking younger, unguarded. He wiped the dust off the glass and stared at it for a long time. "I didn't deserve you," he whispered. Setting the frame gently back on the shelf, he whispered again, "But I'll try to honor you." He opened the window to let the smoke escape. The cold night air drifted in, carrying the faint smell of ash and sea salt, or maybe his memory had filled in the scent. The last spark faded. The room grew still again, but something inside him shifted. He didn't feel lighter. Redemption never comes that easily. But for the first time, the silence didn't crush him. It steadied him. He glanced at her photo one last time before turning off the lights. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I'll go to the foundation." And as the door closed behind him, the faint glow from the moon fell across. The photo of a woman whose love had outlasted both fame and fortune. The morning Damien arrived at the Amira Lawson Foundation was grey and quiet. The building sat on the edge of downtown, painted in soft blues and whites, the colours Amira had chosen herself. The sign out front read, "A place to start again." He stepped out of his black sedan, adjusting his coat. His driver followed, carrying a briefcase even though he wouldn't need one. Damien's pride refused to let him show up empty-handed, even to a place where money meant nothing. Inside, volunteers were setting up tables for breakfast service. The smell of coffee filled the air. A group of women sat in a circle, listening to a counsellor speak about rebuilding confidence. Laughter occasionally broke through the seriousness, a sound Damien hadn't heard in months. A young coordinator, probably in her late 20s, approached him. "Good morning, Mr. Ward. Welcome to the Foundation. I'm Mara." She extended her hand. He shook it briefly. "Let's skip the introductions. I'm only here to fulfill the terms of my late wife's will. Tell me where you need me." Her smile faded slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. We appreciate your presence." She led him through the main hall, explaining how the shelter helped women find housing, jobs, and therapy. Damien only half listened, his eyes wandering to the peeling paint and modest furniture. "This could use better funding," he muttered. "Who manages your finances?" Mara gave him a patient look. "We manage fine. What we lack in money, we make up for in heart." He almost laughed. "Heart doesn't pay bills." She stopped walking. "No, Mr. Ward, but it changes lives, something money doesn't always do." Her words stung, but he ignored them. "So, what's my role here? Signing checks, approving proposals? You'll be serving meals and cleaning rooms this week," she said simply. His brows furrowed. "Excuse me." She smiled politely. "The Foundation serves from the ground up. Everyone works together, no exceptions." He opened his mouth to argue, but the sight of a reporter across the room made him stop. Cameras were still following his redemption journey. Arguing would only make things worse. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Where do I start?" Mara handed him an apron. "Kitchen duty. And Mr. Ward, please don't treat this as charity. The women here don't need your pity." The comment caught him off guard. "I wasn't—" She turned to walk away. "Yes, you were." For the next few hours he stood behind a serving counter, handing out plates of eggs and toast. Some women thanked him. Others avoided eye contact. One older woman looked at him with recognition and whispered, "You're her husband, aren't you?" The one who laughed. He froze for a second, but said nothing. By noon, his suit sleeves were rolled up, his patience thin. He wasn't used to being told what to do, especially by people who didn't know his world. Yet, despite his arrogance, something about the place unsettled him. He watched a woman holding her child thank a volunteer for a warm blanket. Another woman smiled after getting her first job interview lined up. There was hope here, raw, simple hope, and for the first time in years, he didn't know how to act around it. When his shift ended, he walked out quietly. No reporters followed, no applause, just the sound of children laughing in the courtyard, the kind of sound that once filled his house but hadn't in years. He didn't say it aloud, but somewhere deep inside he felt the first crack in the armor he'd worn for too long. Damien returned to the foundation the next morning, this time without his driver or expensive suit. He wore a plain shirt, jeans, and an uneasy expression. He had convinced himself that his presence was enough, that showing up fulfilled the requirement. But the truth was beginning to weigh on him. The silence of his home, the emptiness of his name, the faint echo of Amira's voice in every corner of the foundation. When he entered, Mara was already leading a morning session. A group of women sat in a semicircle, each holding a cup of tea. Their faces told stories before their mouths did: exhaustion, pain, survival. Damien quietly took a seat at the back, intending to stay unseen. One woman named Cynthia spoke first. "I was married for 10 years, she began. "My husband controlled everything, what I wore, who I talked to. When I left, I had nothing, no job, no family, but this place. It gave me a bed and reminded me I was still a person." The group murmured softly in support. Another woman, Kendra, continued, "I used to think kindness was weakness. I let people take from me until I had nothing left. Then I met Amira. She smiled faintly. She told me, kindness isn't weakness when it survives cruelty. I wrote that down the day she said it. I still read it every morning." Damien looked up sharply. He remembered those words. Amira had said something similar to him years ago, back when she still believed he could be better. Hearing them from someone else's mouth hit differently. A third woman spoke next, her voice trembling. "I didn't come here because of abuse. I came because I lost everything. My husband died and the bills kept coming. I thought no one would care. Then the foundation helped me start over. They didn't ask for anything, just effort." Her words sank into him. The simplicity of their gratitude, the quiet dignity in their pain. It unsettled him. He had always associated worth with wealth, yet these women had lost everything and still carried more strength than he had ever shown. When the session ended, Mara approached him. "You stayed the whole hour," she said, surprised. He nodded slowly. "They've all been through so much." "They have," she said softly. "And yet they still find reasons to smile." That's what Amira taught them. He exhaled, his eyes fixed on the empty chair at the center of the circle. "She never told me about any of this." Mara smiled faintly. "She didn't do it for praise. She did it because she believed kindness should speak for itself." He leaned back, running a hand over his face. "I used to think she wasted her time here, that she should have been helping me build something bigger." Mara replied. "You just didn't see it." Her words stayed with him the entire day. He spent the afternoon sorting donations, but his mind was elsewhere, stuck between guilt and awe. Every smile he saw that day reminded him of what he'd dismissed. Every grateful thank you from the women felt like a quiet rebuke. That night, back at home, he couldn't sleep. The echo of their voices followed him. Kindness isn't weakness when it survives cruelty. He whispered to himself, "You are right, Amira. I was blind." And for the first time, he didn't say it with bitterness. He said it with understanding. By the third week, something in Damien had shifted. The bitterness that once powered him had started to quiet down. He still showed up with his guarded posture and sharp tone, but he was different now, listening more, talking less. Mara noticed. So did the women. One morning, during a staff meeting, she said, "We've been struggling to help the women find stable jobs after they leave here. Most of them don't have current skills. We teach them basic budgeting, but that's not enough." Damien looked up. "What if we did more than that?" Mara raised a brow. "More?" He nodded, leaning forward. "I built a tech empire from a desk in a spare room. Half of these women could do the same with the right training. Coding, online business, digital literacy. It's the future." The room went quiet. No one expected him to speak that way. Mara studied him carefully. And who would teach them? "I will," he said simply, "and I'll bring in my old contacts to help." For the first time the volunteers smiled, cautiously but sincerely. That same afternoon, Damien called an old partner, the one who had once begged him to fund a digital education project. Back then, he had refused, saying it didn't yield fast profit. "Now," he said, "I want to reopen that proposal, but this time for women rebuilding their lives." The man on the line was silent for a moment. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Within a week, shipments of refurbished laptops arrived at the foundation. Damien helped set them up himself, sleeves rolled, sweat on his forehead, something no one would have believed months earlier. The women watched in surprise as he knelt on the floor, connecting cables and testing screens. He launched the first training session with 20 participants. "I know most of you don't think of yourselves as tech experts," he said, standing in front of them, "but I built my career from nothing. If you can rebuild your life, you can build anything." One woman raised her hand shyly. "What if we fail?" He paused, then said, "Then you start again, just like I'm doing." It wasn't a rehearsed line. It was truth. Over the next few weeks, the program flourished. The women learned to design websites, create digital resumes, and apply for online jobs. Damien spent his mornings at the shelter, teaching and mentoring, and his evenings reviewing their progress. The media caught wind of it. Photos surfaced of him surrounded by women at computer desks, smiling, not for cameras, but for connection. The same outlets that had once called him heartless now wrote, "Former CEO helps women rebuild through technology." But for Damien, the headlines no longer mattered. Each time he watched a woman send her first email or complete her first project, he thought of Amira. She had built this foundation out of empathy. He was only continuing her blueprint. One evening, as he prepared to leave, Mara stopped him at the door. "You're doing something good here," she said softly. He gave a small nod. "I'm doing what she would have wanted. She'd be proud," Mara replied. He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes said everything. When he got home, he found himself opening the photo of Amira again, the one he had refused to take down. He looked at it for a long moment and whispered, "I'm trying, love. I'm finally trying." And for the first time in a long while, the man who had once mocked kindness was beginning to live by it. Weeks turned into months, and Damien's presence at the foundation became part of its rhythm. The staff stopped treating him like an outsider. The women began greeting him warmly. The distrust that once followed his name was slowly replaced by quiet respect. It wasn't because he donated more money or made grand gestures. It was because he showed up every day, rain or shine. He helped one woman prepare for her first job interview, taught another how to manage an online business, and sat beside a group of single mothers, teaching them how to create digital portfolios. But more than his lessons, it was his words that began to surprise everyone, especially himself. One morning, a woman named Renee sat across from him, anxious about her first interview at a small design firm. "What if they see my past and don't hire me?" she asked, her hands trembling. Damien thought for a long moment before answering. "Then they've lost out on someone who knows how to start over, and that's a skill most people never learn." She smiled, the tension leaving her face. He caught himself after she left, realizing those were almost the same. Words Amira had once said to him when he lost his first business deal. "Failure doesn't mean the end, Damien. It means a new start if you're brave enough to try again." The next day, during a group session, a woman named Elise spoke about struggling to forgive her ex-husband. "He destroyed everything," she said, tears welling. "I don't want to hate him, but I can't help it." Damien hesitated, then said quietly, "Forgiveness doesn't mean he wins. It means you stop letting him control how you feel." The room fell silent. The women nodded slowly. Mara, standing at the back, looked at him in quiet awe. Those were the exact words Amira had once said about him, years ago, after their first major fight. Every time he spoke now, echoes of her voice guided him. She had been patient where he had been proud, compassionate where he had been cold. And through every lesson he taught, he realized she was still teaching him. One evening, he stayed late to review a young woman's website project. She looked nervous, fidgeting beside him. "I don't think it's good enough," she said softly. He glanced at the screen. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest and full of effort. "It's more than good enough," he said. "It's yours, and that's what makes it powerful." Her eyes filled with tears. "You sound like Mrs. Ward. She used to say things like that to us." He smiled faintly. "She said them to me too. I just wasn't listening then." After she left, Damien sat alone in the computer lab. The quiet hum of machines surrounded him, and for the first time he felt at peace. Not for what he had lost, but for what he was finally learning to give. He remembered one of Amira's last notes he hadn't burned. A small card she once left in his jacket pocket. "Love is work, but if you do the work, it becomes home." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm doing the work now." And though she was gone, he felt closer to her than he had in years. Not through wealth, not through guilt, but through purpose. It was a Friday morning when Mara called Damien into the main hall. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said. "She just arrived yesterday." He followed her to the reception area, where a young woman sat holding a baby wrapped in a faded pink blanket. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes simple but clean. Despite the exhaustion on her face, her eyes carried quiet strength. "Mr. Ward," Mara said, "this is Layla. Her little girl's name is Hope." The woman stood and smiled nervously. "I know who you are," she said softly. "Mrs. Ward talked about you." Damien blinked, startled. She did?" Layla nodded, rocking the baby gently. "Yes. She helped me when I was in the hospital. I couldn't afford the delivery costs. She covered every bill and told me to promise her one thing, that I'd never stop believing in myself, no matter who walked away." Damien's throat tightened. "That sounds like her." Layla smiled. "She said you'd come around someday, that you'd find your way back to what matters." Her words hit him like a wave. He took a slow breath, unable to look away from the child in her arms, small, innocent, wrapped in warmth Amira had helped create. He crouched down, his eyes meeting Layla's. "She never told me about you." "She didn't tell many people," Layla replied. "She didn't want credit. She said love doesn't need applause. She said people remember kindness longer than success." Damien's hands trembled slightly. For a moment he saw Amira in Layla's calmness, that same patience, that same gentle power. He forced a small smile. "How are you holding up?" Layla shrugged lightly. "Trying my best," Hope keeps me going. The foundation's helping me find a job. I want to work in healthcare, like her." Something inside Damien softened further. "You will," he said quietly, "and I'll make sure you have what you need to get there." Layla's eyes widened. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, voice breaking slightly. Because she already did. Mara watched from the doorway, her expression tender but unreadable. Damien held out his finger toward the baby, and little Hope wrapped her tiny hand around it. The simple touch undid him completely. Every wall he'd built, every excuse he'd made, all of it collapsed in that one fragile moment. His eyes glistened, his breath uneven. "She believed in people like you," he whispered. "She believed in a world I couldn't see until now." Layla smiled gently. "Maybe that's why she left you the foundation, so you could finally see it, too." He nodded, unable to speak. He looked down at the baby again, the living proof that Amira's compassion had continued long after her final breath. When Layla left the room, Damien stayed behind, standing in silence. He ran a hand over his face, his body trembling under the weight of emotion. For the first time since Amira's death, he didn't fight the feeling. He let it wash over him, guilt, grief, and gratitude all at once. He turned toward the window, the city glowing softly in the distance. "You told her I'd come around someday," he whispered, "and you were right." That night, he didn't return to his penthouse. He stayed at the foundation, helping organize the donations, not because anyone asked him to, but because for once it felt right. The day after meeting Layla and her baby, something in Damien shifted completely. For weeks, he had moved through the foundation like a man learning to walk again, determined, quiet, and uncertain. But now he felt every heartbeat of the place, every voice, every story, every echo of Amira's presence. That afternoon, Mara found him alone in the shelter's main hall, sitting on one of the old wooden benches. The lights were off, the room still except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. In front of him stood a framed photo of Amira that hung above the entrance. Her, smiling in front of the first completed building, holding a bouquet of daisies. He stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he spoke. "She gave them everything," he said softly, almost to himself. Even when she had nothing left, Mara approached quietly. That's who she was. He looked at her with eyes that seemed older now. "I didn't deserve her." Mara didn't argue. She simply said, "But you can still honor her." Her words hung in the air as she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He sat there for what felt like hours, memories rushing back. The hospital, fundraiser where they met, the laughter on the beach during their wedding, the way she used to hum while making tea, the way she looked at him even when he didn't deserve to be looked at with love. The guilt that had followed him for months pressed heavier on his chest until it finally broke through the surface. He lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking as quiet sobs filled the room. For the first time, Damien Ward, the man who once measured worth by wealth, wept not for what he had lost, but for who he had become. These weren't the tears of a fallen CEO. They were the tears of a man finally stripped of ego, standing face to face with truth. He whispered through the sobs, "I'm sorry, Amira. I'm so sorry." No one saw it. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Just a man finally learning that redemption begins when pride ends. After a while, he stood and walked toward the photo. He reached out and touched the edge of the frame gently. "You were right," he said. "Love without respect isn't love at all." He exhaled deeply, the weight lifting, if only slightly. Then, quietly, he smiled through the tears. A small, broken smile, but real. He turned off the lights before leaving, whispering one final promise. "I'll make sure they never forget what you stood for." The following morning, Damien showed up before anyone else. He set up chairs for the new intake class, brewed coffee, and prepared lesson materials for the digital training. When Mara arrived, she stopped in the doorway, stunned. "You're early," she said. He looked up from the table. "No, I'm finally on time," she smiled. That day, for the first time, Damien didn't carry guilt in his eyes. He carried purpose. Have you ever seen someone change for the better? Share that story below. Someone out there needs hope today. A full year had passed since Damien first stepped into the foundation. Seasons had changed, cities had moved on, and the world no longer whispered his name. But for him, every day still began and ended with her memory. That morning, he walked through the quiet cemetery in a simple grey coat. The same place that once saw his arrogance now welcomed his humility. No photographers followed him. No cars waited outside. It was only him, a single white rose in his hand and the wind brushing through the trees. When he reached Amira's grave, he paused for a long time. The marble stone was clean, polished, with her name carved softly beneath. The words, "A heart that healed others," still beats through kindness. He knelt down and placed the rose gently on the ground. His hands lingered there, trembling slightly. "It's been a year," he said quietly, "and I finally understand what you meant." He glanced at the engraving again, his voice steady but low. "You built something bigger than both of us, Amira. I thought success meant control. You showed me it means service." A faint smile touched his lips. "The foundation's thriving. The women are teaching others now. Some of them have businesses, jobs, homes. You'd be proud." He fell silent, eyes fixed on the rose. "I still miss you," he whispered. "But this time, it's not from regret. It's from gratitude." The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, and he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the calm wash over him. There were no cameras, no applause, no boardrooms, just peace. When he finally stood, he looked stronger, not because of wealth or power, but because he had learned how to live with less and love with more. Before leaving, he touched the top of the stone once more and said softly, "I did what you asked, Amira. I lived right when you were gone." And for the first time, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt answered. The months following that visit to the grave brought no luxury, no awards, and no cameras chasing Damien's name. The man who had once lived in glass towers now rented a small apartment near the foundation. The marble floors and panoramic skyline were gone, replaced by worn wooden floors and the faint hum of city noise through an open window. But he didn't miss the noise of success anymore. He missed peace when he had money. Now he had peace without it. Every morning he walked to the foundation on foot. No driver, no suit, no assistants. Just him and a cup of black coffee from the corner cafe. The same people who once looked at him with judgment now nodded in greeting. The hostility was gone, replaced with quiet respect. He still gave lectures occasionally at business events, but they weren't about profit margins or leadership. They were about loss, redemption, and rebuilding from the inside out. His words were simple. You can't fix the world if you haven't faced yourself. The audiences always fell silent after that. He had no empire anymore. The company had new management. His name wasn't on magazine covers, but for the first time, he slept soundly. The anxiety, the greed, the restless drive to prove something, all gone. One evening, after closing up the training center, he walked through the classroom, running his hand over the desks. Laptops glowed faintly under the lights. Women finishing projects, children doing homework beside their mothers. Laughter filled the air. He smiled quietly, remembering how far the foundation had come. "She built this," he murmured. "I just helped carry the bricks." Outside, the night was calm. No flashbulbs, no roaring engines, just life, ordinary, beautiful, and finally enough. He sat on the front steps of the building, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. A few of the women leaving waved goodbye. One called out, "See you tomorrow, Mr. Ward." He waved back, his eyes soft. "Tomorrow," he said with a small smile. In that moment, he understood what Amira had wanted him to see all along. That real power doesn't come from being remembered by millions. It comes from being trusted by a few. And for the first time, Damien Ward, once the world's loudest man, had finally learned to live quietly. A week later, Mara entered Damien's small office at the foundation with an envelope in hand and a warm smile. "You've got mail," she said, placing it on his desk. He looked up from the stack of applications he was reviewing. "Who's it from?" "The City Council," she replied. "They're hosting the official opening of the new Women's Centre, the one your late wife's foundation funded. They want you to speak." He froze for a moment, staring at the envelope. "They want me to speak?" "Yes," Mara said softly. "They said it wouldn't feel right without you." Damien leaned back in his chair, unsure how to respond. He had spent the past year serving quietly, avoiding attention. The thought of standing before cameras and microphones again stirred something uneasy inside him. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he said after a long pause. "People haven't forgotten who I was." Mara smiled faintly. "That's exactly why they need to hear who you've become." Her words lingered long after she left the room. He sat in silence, staring at Amira's photo on the wall, the same one from their wedding day. The wind had caught her hair in the picture, her smile bright and full of life. He whispered, "You'd hate all this attention, wouldn't you?" Then he chuckled quietly, "But you'd still tell me to go." That evening, he opened the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation written on crisp stationery. "You are cordially invited to deliver the keynote address at the grand opening of the Amira Lawson Women's Centre, a place built on love, compassion, and second chances." Beneath it, someone had handwritten, "Your story will help others believe in change." He stared at those words for a long time before finally setting the letter down. The next morning, he met Mara in the hallway. "Tell them I'll be there," he said quietly. When she smiled and nodded, he added, "But I'm not going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about her." And so, for the first time in years, Damien Ward prepared to step back into a spotlight, not as a billionaire, not as a disgraced husband, but as a man who had learned that legacy isn't written in wealth, but in the lives we mend after we've broken them. The day of the grand opening arrived bright and clear. The city square was filled with people, women from the shelter, volunteers, community leaders, and a handful of press. The new Amira Lawson Women's Centre stood behind them, a tall, gleaming building, with open glass doors and Amira's favourite quote engraved on the front. "Kindness is the only investment that never fails." As Damien approached the stage, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some recognised him instantly. A year ago, he would have stiffened under the weight of their eyes. Today, he only smiled politely and nodded. He didn't come for approval, he came for truth. Mara introduced him warmly. "Please welcome Mr. Damien Ward, the man who turned regret into rebuilding." The applause was gentle, respectful. He stepped to the microphone, adjusted it, and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply took in the building behind him. Amira's dream made real. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady. "Thank you for being here today. A year ago, I stood in a very different place. I was powerful, wealthy, and admired, and I was empty. My wife, Amira, gave me everything I didn't deserve. Her patience, her kindness, her belief that people could change." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "I didn't understand her while she was here. I thought compassion made her soft. I thought success meant being above others. I was wrong." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "When she passed, I lost more than a wife. I lost the only person who ever tried to teach me what real wealth is. It's not money or power or headlines. It's compassion." It's the ability to lift someone who has fallen, not because you gain from it, but because it's right. His gaze drifted toward the women standing near the front, some of them former residents of the shelter. These women taught me that redemption isn't given, it's earned. And my wife, she gave me the chance to earn it. He swallowed hard, voice softening. I mocked her love when I didn't understand it. I celebrated freedom the day she was buried. But today, standing here, in the place she built with her heart, I finally see what she was building all along. Humanity. The audience was still. Even the air seemed to pause. She taught me that compassion doesn't make you weak. It makes you worthy. When he stepped back from the microphone, the crowd erupted, not with thunderous applause, but with tears, claps, and nods that came from understanding. It wasn't fame returning to him. It was grace. The moment Damien stepped back from the podium, the crowd fell into a hush that felt almost sacred. For several seconds, no one moved. The air was heavy, not with pity, but with something far deeper. Every person there had heard sincerity in his voice, the kind that couldn't be rehearsed. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with one of the women from the shelter, a quiet clap that built into another, then another, until the sound rolled through the crowd like a gentle wave. Some people wiped their eyes as they stood, clapping not for his success, but for his transformation. Mara stood near the front row, tears streaking down her cheeks. She had watched him walk through pride, guilt, and surrender to arrive here, humbled, honest, changed. When their eyes met across the stage, she gave him a nod that said everything. You did it. Even the city officials, usually so composed, were moved. One of them leaned toward another and whispered, I've never seen a man repent like that in public. As the applause softened, Damien glanced toward the front row, where Layla sat with her baby on her lap. The little girl clapped along with the crowd, her tiny hands out of sync, but full of joy. Layla smiled at him, and he smiled back, silently thanking her for reminding him that kindness never dies with the person who started it. The mayor stepped forward, shaking Damien's hand firmly. Mr. Ward, your wife would be proud. So would this city. Damien's eyes glistened, but he smiled humbly. Thank you. But this isn't about me. It's about her, and what she taught all of us. The crowd nodded, their emotions raw but peaceful. A gentle breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the children playing near the fountain. It was as if the world itself paused to witness redemption take its final bow. As the ceremony ended, volunteers began handing out white roses, Amira's favorite. People placed them around the new building's entrance, creating a sea of soft petals. Damien stayed behind, helping arrange the roses, one by one. He didn't rush. Each one felt like a quiet thank you. When he finally stepped back to look at the display, his chest tightened, not from pain, but from peace. For once, he didn't feel haunted by his past. He felt guided by it. The woman he once broke had somehow rebuilt him without ever lifting a finger. As the last guests drifted away and the courtyard grew quiet, Damien stayed behind. The sun dipped low, bathing the new women's centre in a soft golden hue. He stood at the steps, hands in his pockets, staring at the sign above the entrance, the Amira Lawson Women's Centre. The letters gleamed, alive with purpose. He took a slow breath, letting the silence settle. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the laughter of a few children playing down the block. Life was moving forward, just as Amira had wanted it to. Mara walked up beside him. You did well today, she said gently. He smiled faintly. No, we did. This was never about proving anything. It was about finishing what she started. She looked toward the building. Her heart's still here. He nodded. Yeah, I feel it. There was nothing more to say. He stepped down the stairs and walked toward the row of white roses at the entrance. He picked one, turned it slowly between his fingers, and whispered, You won, Amira. Not through revenge, but through grace. He placed the rose back among the others and added softly, "You taught me that love without respect is hollow. And now I understand, real strength is in gentleness." He took one last look at the building before walking away, the setting sun outlining his figure. He wasn't a billionaire headline anymore. He wasn't the cold man who mocked love. He was a man reborn through the legacy of a woman he once took for granted. He mocked her in life, celebrated her death, but her grace rebuilt his soul. And then, for viewers watching, Damien's story left a message deeper than any business lesson ever could, that wealth fades, but character remains. If this story moved you, remember, kindness leaves a legacy no fortune can replace. Support compassion wherever you are. Like this video, comment, "Grace lives on," and subscribe to Mr. Ashford. Love stories for more true lessons in love, redemption, and humanity.